light of terror has faded. The galaxy is drowning in darkness and betrayal. They thought that by destroying our dream, they would break us. That before the face of the abyss, we would lay down our arms. But where the light of reason dies, blind, absolute faith is forged. The gold of our pride has turned to ash. We have clothed ourselves in eternal mourning. And we swore an oath. As long as a single enemy of the Emperor draws breath, our crusade will never end.
Hear now the litany of the faithful and bow your head before the golden throne of terror. For more than 10,000 years, the master of mankind has sat immobile upon his seat of agony, the only beacon of salvation in a universe that suffocates beneath an ocean of oppressive night. This is the 41st millennium, an era where the stars themselves bleed with the ruin of shattered empires. In this pitch-black void, reason is a forgotten heresy, and hope is the delusion of the weak. The Adeptus Astartes, the angels of death, march across the galaxy to hold back the encroaching nightmare. Most of these transhuman warriors fight out of a bounden duty or an ancient sense of martial honor. They war to preserve the dying embers of a forgotten age. But there exists a brotherhood that casts aside all worldly notions of honor. They do not fight for duty, nor do they fight for peace. They fight for the absolute, unrelenting, religious extermination of the heretic and the alien. They are the Black Templars. Imagine the terrible grandeur of their arrival. The absolute crushing darkness of the void is suddenly shattered by the emergence of colossal, cathedral-like prows tearing through the fabric of real space. These strike cruisers are fortress monasteries forged of adamantium, bristling with macro cannons and stained glass windows that span miles across. They are the heralds of absolute doom. For the warriors within these holy vessels, there has been no peace. They have endured 10,000 years of unceasing, unforgiving war without a single day of rest. Every moment of their existence is a prayer delivered through the teeth of a chainsword. To understand the depths of their zealotry, one must look upon the great schism that divides the present from the past. During the era of the Great Crusade, the legions of the Space Marines were secular conquerors. They spread the Imperial truth, a doctrine that violently rejected all superstition, magic, and gods. The Emperor himself commanded that he was but a man, demanding reason over blind faith. The Black Templars are the ultimate repudiation of that secular dream. They are a profound deviation from the original Imperial truth, for they actually worship the Emperor as a true and living God. To them, the galaxy is a temple that has been defiled by the mere existence of the Xenos and the traitor. They embrace the heavy mantle of the penitent, scourging their own flesh to remain pure in a galaxy drowning in sin. Their wrath is a holy conflagration meant to burn away the shadows of a fallen cosmos. There is no mercy in their hearts for the unclean. Every world they conquer is violently sanctified in the blood of billions. They are the fanatical sword of a dead dream, blind to the supreme irony of their own existence. This madness, this unending crusade of righteous slaughter, did not simply emerge from the void. It was forged in the apocalyptic fires of the greatest betrayal the galaxy has ever known. To find the genesis of their eternal hatred, we must look back through the mists of time. We must cast our gaze to the darkest hour of human history, to the cataclysmic siege of terror and the agonizing death of the secular imperium. Cast your mind back across 10 millennia to the darkest hour of our species. Look upon the throne world of terror, not as the fortified cathedral it is today, but as a dying jewel choking beneath skies bleeding pure warp fire. The Siege of Terra was not merely a military campaign, but the violent execution of an age. Here, the Imperial fists stood upon the battlements of the Imperial Palace, their golden armor reflecting the unnatural storms tearing real space asunder. Rogel Dawn, the immovable Praetorian, found himself overwhelmed not merely by the endless tides of traitor legionaries, but by the impossible nightmares made flesh that poured from the weeping firmament. The stoic Sons of Dawn watched in silent, agonizing disbelief as their rational universe shattered into mythic horror. To understand their devastation, one must understand the cruelest irony of the Emperor's grand design. Before the Horus Heresy, the galaxy was to be conquered by the Imperial truth. The Master of Mankind demanded a secular reality, utterly devoid of gods, spirits, or superstition. He denied his own divinity with absolute authority. Yet it was precisely this arrogant denial of the divine that left his beloved sons completely vulnerable to the primordial truth of chaos. By burying the existence of the ruinous powers beneath the cold stone of logic, the Emperor denied his legions the spiritual armor required to fight actual demons. Logic cannot banish a bloodthirster. Reason cannot unmake a plague of the soul. When the heavens over Terra split open and the Neverborn descended to feast upon reality, the pristine walls of secular thought crumbled into useless ash. Standing amidst the burning ruins of enlightenment, the Loyalists learned a terrible, unutterable lesson. As they watched their brothers slaughtered by geometry that defied physics and spells drawn from the abyss, a new paradigm took root in the blood-soaked soil of Terra. If reason was a liability against gods, then madness must be weaponized. They suffered the horrific realization that against a pantheon of malevolent deities, only extreme dogmatic hatred could fortify the mortal soul. Blind, absolute faith became the only viable shield against the corrupting whispers of the warp. The mind had to be sealed tight against all doubt. Ignorance became a virtue, and furious zealotry became the ultimate survival mechanism for a species staring into the maw of hell. The melancholy of a dying dream slowly metamorphosed into the blazing crucible of righteous fury. The golden giants who had sought to build a paradise of enlightened men died on those walls, and from their ashes rose something far more terrifying. They became holy crusaders, fueled by an apocalyptic spite that would forever alter the destiny of mankind. This psychological slaughter forged a new breed of warrior, one who no longer fought to educate the galaxy, but to violently purge it. Out of this roaring furnace of broken logic and newly birthed fanaticism, one singular champion stepped forward to embody the uncompromising hatred of this dark era, the first captain of the Imperial fists and the herald of our damnation, Sigismund. The Imperial truth had shattered against the walls of the ultimate redoubt. Where secular reason faltered beneath the onslaught of warp-born nightmares, a new and terrible weapon was forged from the fires of desperation. This weapon was not made of mere steel or promethium, but of absolute, unyielding fanaticism. Sigismund, first captain of the Imperial fists, stepped into this crucible of shattered ideals. He had been a paragon of martial pride, the finest blade of his legion. Yet upon the blood-soaked stones of the inner palace, pride was no longer enough. Summoned before the weary gaze of his Primarch, Rogel Dawn, and the shadowed wisdom of Malcador the Sigillite, Sigismund was offered a burden that would erase his very soul. He was to become the first Emperor's champion. In that fateful communion, Sigismund abandoned his personal ambitions and the glorious heraldry of his past. He was emptied of all that made him a man, becoming a hollow vessel waiting to be filled by the pure, unadulterated wrath of the master of mankind. To bear this sacred duty, he was gifted relics of unparalleled significance. He was bestowed the Black Sword, a masterwork blade forged not just to sever flesh, but to execute the most corrupted souls. He was clad in the armor of faith. These relics were not merely tools of war, but symbols of a complete and agonizing surrender. To wear the armor of faith was to forsake the self entirely, offering up one's identity to the divine will of the emperor. There was no Sigismund anymore, only the physical manifestation of the emperor's vengeance. His golden warplate, once a beacon of the imperial fists, was rendered an obsidian void, wiped clean of all honors and legacy. When this avatar of death strode out onto the shattered plains of terror, the very air seemed to freeze around him. He did not lead armies. He did not issue tactical commands. He sought out the monstrous champions of the traitor legions, those swollen with the dark gifts of the ruinous powers. As the screaming maniacs of the World Eaters and the Emperor's children charged with chaotic abandon, Sigismund answered them with terrifying silence. He uttered no battle cries. He offered no curses. He simply moved with a cold, mechanical perfection, a reaper harvesting the lives of betrayers. Every swing of the Black Sword ended a legend of the heresy. He fought not with the passion of a warrior, but with the cold fanaticism of a zealot carrying out a holy execution. The traitors found no glory in fighting him, only the absolute terror of facing a ghost driven by divine hatred. This merciless crusade through the ruins of terror cemented a legacy that would echo through the millennia. Sigismund had shown the Imperium what it must become to survive in a galaxy without hope. Yet this terrifying metamorphosis was only the beginning of his dark path. The fires of the heresy would soon burn out, leaving ashes that demanded further retribution. The true cost of this spiritual awakening would not be paid on terror, but in the grueling crusades to come, leading inexorably toward the bitterness of the Iron Cage and the shattering of the Imperial fists themselves. The fires of the Siege of Terror had cooled, leaving only ashes and the hollow silence of a crippled galaxy. The Imperium had survived, yet the brotherhood that forged it was irrevocably shattered. Rogel Dawn, the Praetorian of Terror, was a ruined giant. His mind was a fortress besieged by an inescapable guilt over the internment of his father upon the Golden Throne. While Dawn descended into the abyss of his own sorrow, another Primarch sought to bind the bleeding wounds of the realm with cold, unyielding law. Robout Guilliman, the Lord of Macragge, returned not with words of comfort, but with a grand design of structural severance. He authored the Codex Astartes, a monumental treatise demanding the absolute dissolution of the Space Marine legions. Here, we must pause to understand the grim necessity of Guilliman's decree. The Horus heresy had proven that a single charismatic commander holding the loyalty of 100,000 transhuman warriors was an existential threat to humanity. The Codex Astartes mandated that no individual should ever again wield such apocalyptic power. It decreed that the mighty Legiones Astartes be fractured into smaller, independent chapters. Each chapter was strictly limited to a fighting strength of exactly 1,000 Space Marines. This rigid structure ensured that if a chapter master were to fall to the seductions of chaos, the ensuing rebellion could be contained and crushed without tearing the galaxy asunder once more. It was a masterstroke of pragmatic logistics. Yet, to those who had bled upon the walls of the Imperial Palace, it was an unforgivable insult. Rogal Dorn viewed the Codex not as salvation, but as an act of profound betrayal. To strip him of his legion was to spit upon the countless sacrifices of his sons. Tensions flared instantly between the two demigods. The Imperium, still choking on the dust of the heresy, teetered on the very precipice of a second catastrophic civil war. Loyalist strike cruisers locked their targeting augers upon Imperial fists' battle barges. But Dorn could not bear to strike the final blow against the fragile empire he had sacrificed everything to defend. Instead, he sought a different, darker absolution. He turned his fury away from Guilliman and unleashed his legion upon the Iron Warriors in an atrocity known forever as the Iron Cage. It was a horrific meat grinder of unimaginable cruelty. The Imperial fists marched willingly into a labyrinth of endless traps, overlapping kill zones, and agonizing attrition. They fought not for tactical victory, but for spiritual punishment. It was a near-suicidal purge, a desperate attempt to cleanse their perceived failure in the blood of their bitterest rivals. Thousands of golden-armored warriors died screaming in the mud and razor wire, their lives willingly spent to exorcise the agonizing grief of their gene-sire. When the slaughter finally ceased, the Imperial fists were decimated in body as well as spirit. Only then did Rogal Dorn truly yield. In an agony of capitulation, he accepted the Codex Astartes to spare the ruined Imperium from further fratricide. The lost Golden Age was well and truly dead, replaced by a bitter, resentful era forged in endless sorrow. The mighty Seventh Legion was no more. It would be divided, its veterans scattered, to forge new histories under new heraldries. But in the shadow of this tragic decree, the fire of absolute defiance still burned within the heart of the Emperor's champion, a warrior who flatly refused to sheathe his blade in the name of a fragile peace. Thus, the great sundering of the Seventh Legion was realized. Cast out from the shadow of their Primarch, the most zealous and unrelenting sons of Dawn gathered beneath the banner of Sigismund. For them, the dictates of the Codex Astartes were not a blueprint for the future, but a decree of banishment. They did not view this division as a mere military restructuring. To Sigismund and his fervent brethren, this was a righteous exile. It was a holy pilgrimage, born of guilt and forged in the fires of unending wrath. In a solemn and silent liturgy of devotion, they stripped away the golden ceramite of their past. They painted their armor as pitch black as the void itself. They took upon themselves the heraldry of the Emperor's champion, bearing the stark white cross of their newfound purpose. Through this ritual, the Black Templars were formally born into the cosmos. Sigismund stood before his newborn chapter, officially taking the mantle of the first High Marshal. He was no longer just a son of Dawn. He was the absolute embodiment of the Emperor's vengeance, entirely devoid of mercy, hesitation, or compromise. In the shadowed halls of their gathering, he delivered an oath that would echo through the millennia. He swore before the weeping statues of terror that they would never cease their prosecution of the alien, the mutant, and the heretic. He vowed that they would never rest, that their blades would never dull, and that their bolters would never empty, until the very last enemy of the master of mankind was utterly purged from the stars. This was the vow of the eternal crusade. It was a solemn, unbreakable promise to burn the galaxy clean in the name of the Golden Throne. While other newly formed chapters claimed fertile worlds to govern and protect, the Black Templars rejected the very concept of peace. They looked upon the notion of a tranquil homeworld with utter contempt. To settle was to stagnate, and to rest was to invite the insidious touch of heresy. They recognized that the Imperium was built upon the blood of martyrs, and only a continuous river of slaughter could sustain it. Their hearts swelled with an ecclesiastical triumph, a terrible and magnificent purpose that transcended the mortal need for a home. The void would be their fortress, the fires of war would be their hearth. Their crusade would be absolute, unending, and uncompromising. They cast their gaze outward to the darkest reaches of the galaxy. They understood that a static defense could never truly protect the realm of humanity from the horrors of the dark. The only true salvation lay in a perpetual and merciless offensive. This fundamental belief birthed a new breed of Adeptus Astartes, untethered to a single rock, spreading the light of the Emperor through the purifying application of Chainsword and Holy Prometheum. As centuries turned into millennia, this unbroken vow would shape their entire operational existence. The descendants of Sigismund would take to the stars not as planetary defenders, but as a nomadic force of absolute destruction. Their fanaticism would soon outgrow the bonds of a single world, forcing them into the boundless dark where their wrath would manifest in colossal vessels of war. "10,000 years have ground the galaxy to dust since Sigismund first swore his unbreakable oath. Yet that singular vow did not merely echo through the annals of history. It became the anvil upon which an entirely new breed of war was forged. In the dark millennium of the present day, the sons of Sigismund do not huddle upon a single vulnerable rock. They have become an omnipresent wrath, taking to the stars in colossal armadas known as crusade fleets. These are the true cathedrals of the void. They are drifting, ironclad continents that prowl the great darkness of space without the fragile tether of a homeworld. At the very heart of this nomadic empire sails the eternal Crusader. This is a Gloriana-class battleship of unfathomable scale, a sacred leviathan from the dawn of the Imperium that serves as the ultimate mobile fortress monastery. Its obsidian flanks bristle with macro cannons and lance batteries capable of cracking hostile planets asunder. Within its cavernous Gothic belly, the brutal reality of industrial warfare marries perfectly with unyielding holy devotion. Ages of architectural accumulation have transformed its internal decks into towering basilicas, vaulted reliquaries filled with the bones of martyrs, and labyrinthine training halls where thousands of initiates clash in bloody, unending drills. It is a flying metropolis of righteous hatred. Billions of indentured serfs, cybernetic menials, and blind servitors toil ceaselessly within the lightless radioactive engine blocks just to keep this mechanical behemoth moving toward the next slaughter. To comprehend the Black Templars, one must understand that they do not deploy as a standard Adeptus Astartes chapter. They operate under a singular, uncompromising operational hierarchy designed solely for perpetual, autonomous conquest. At the pinnacle sits the High Marshal, the spiritual and military heir to Sigismund, whose word is the absolute law of the entire crusading host. Beneath him, the marshals take command of individual crusade fleets, wielding absolute authority to strike out into the black unknown. These marshals delegate specific ground campaigns to their castellans, battle-hardened veterans who lead distinct fighting companies into the bloodiest meat grinders of the galaxy. Each crusade fleet is a self-sustaining instrument of extermination that functions like a fully independent Imperial crusade. They do not wait for the High Lords of Terror to issue commands or point them toward the enemy. A marshal possesses the sovereign power to declare a holy war upon an entire sector, directing the unimaginable logistical might of his fleet to purge 100-star systems simultaneously. They sweep through the void like a celestial firestorm, an apocalyptic war machine that answers to no earthly master. Whenever a fleet departs to bring the Emperor's wrath to a new subsector, they leave behind only ruined worlds and vast fields of drifting debris. This unending autonomous momentum across thousands of light years creates a logistical paradox that perfectly obscures their operations from the wider Imperium. Scattered across 1,000,000 worlds and bound only by their shared fanaticism, the endless nature of their void-faring crusades lays the foundation for a defiant structural reality. To the scribes of the Administratum, the sheer scale of the Black Templar fleets presents a terrifying paradox regarding how they maintain such apocalyptic numbers without being declared traitors. The answer lies in a masterful manipulation of the very laws they despise. When the Primarch Guilliman penned the Codex Astartes, he shattered the mighty legions into 1,000-man chapters to ensure no single commander could ever again threaten the Imperium. Sigismund, the first High Marshal, viewed this edict not as a stroke of wisdom, but as an act of profound cowardice. Yet, rather than openly declare rebellion against the Lord of Macragge, the Black Templars exploited a singular monumental loophole woven into the very fabric of the Codex itself. Guilliman conceded that a chapter engaged in an active, unbroken crusade could not be strictly bound to the 1,000-man limit, allowing for the rapid replacement of continuous casualties. The Black Templars seized upon this concession and simply never stopped crusading. By declaring an eternal holy war that has raged for 10 millennia, they render the bureaucratic restrictions of the Codex entirely null and void. They operate under a higher jurisdiction, replacing the secular laws of the Primarch with the divine mandate of the God Emperor. Because their crusade is fragmented across dozens of battle groups scattered throughout the galaxy, no imperial authority can ever accurately tally their true strength. The High Marshals actively conceal their muster rolls, treating the inquiries of the Adeptus Terra with thinly veiled contempt. Yet, behind the locked iron doors of their fortress monasteries and the shadowed decks of the Eternal Crusader, the truth is whispered among the highest echelons of the Ordo Hereticus. Conservative estimates suggest the Black Templars boast an operational strength of 5,000 to 6,000 transhuman warriors. Some chroniclers fear the number is vastly higher. They are not a chapter, but a Space Marine Legion in all but name, marching through the rotting carcass of the Imperium with absolute impunity. The High Lords of Terra and the Dread Inquisitors know of this deception. They choose to turn a blind eye. The Black Templars are simply too effective, slaughtering the enemies of humanity with a ferocious zeal that no other imperial force can match. More importantly, the Inquisition understands that to formally accuse the Sons of Dawn of heresy would ignite a catastrophic civil war. To provoke the Templars is to invite the wrath of a fully mobilized legion of religious fanatics who answer only to the throne of terror. Their arrogance is tolerated because it buys the Imperium survival, paid for in oceans of Xenos and heretic blood. This disdain for the Codex Astartes does not end with mere numbers. To sustain such an immense and scattered armada, the Black Templars have entirely discarded the traditional methods of sustaining a chapter, forging an internal hierarchy that spits upon the secular wisdom of Guilliman and paves the way for a completely unorthodox system of recruitment. Just as the Black Templars cast aside the dictated limits of chapter size, so too do they scorn the rigid squad structures dictated by the Codex Astartes. There is no 10th Company of Scouts here, no coddled training reserve waiting far from the vanguard. Instead, the chapter embraces a savage martial Darwinism that demands immediate baptism by fire. Within the sprawling ranks of the Crusader squads, a full battle brother, recognized as an initiate, takes personal responsibility for a newly implanted recruit. This neophyte is not sheltered or eased into the theater of war. He is thrust directly into the most violent storm of the front lines, carrying nothing but a chainsword, a bolt pistol, and a desperate need to survive. Bound by a solemn oath to his mentor, the neophyte learns the holy art of butchery while standing knee-deep in the shattered corpses of the enemy. It is a brutal, unforgiving existence where weakness is instantly rewarded with death. If the neophyte falters, he dies, and his failure is rightfully purged from the chapter's glorious record. If he survives, it is only because he has learned to match the blinding fury of his initiate master. He must mirror every parry and every execution in a desperate bid to prove his worth to the Emperor. This master and apprentice dynamic is an unending cycle of mentorship forged entirely through bloodshed. Yet survival is merely the first step on the bloody path of a true Templar. Those few who rise above the rank of initiate, whose zeal outshines even the blinding hatred of their peers, are elevated to the hallowed ranks of the Sword Brethren. You must not mistake these warriors for a standard first company of veterans centralized and waiting for singular deployment. The Sword Brethren are a localized, terrifying elite woven directly into the fabric of every individual crusade. They serve as the Marshal's personal household guard, enforcing his supreme will with thunderhammer and lightning claw. Clad in distinct and terrifying heraldry, their armor heavily adorned with Crusader seals and accented with the crimson trim of absolute authority, they stand as the paragons of martial extreme. Promotion into this inner circle is never granted for mere tactical acumen, patience, or defensive strategy. It is earned strictly through a relentless, recorded tally of zealous slaughter and an unbreakable mastery of melee combat. A sword brother is a walking monument to the Emperor's wrath, a warrior who has waded through oceans of Xenos and heretic blood to claim his rightful place at the right hand of his commander. To look upon them is to see the ultimate culmination of the chapter's hierarchy of hate. From the lowliest neophyte hacking desperately at an alien throat to the veteran sword brother severing warlord heads in a storm of righteous fury, the entire progression system is a singular engine of unending war. It is a brotherhood built entirely upon absolute faith, blinding fury, and the relentless swinging of the blade. However, such a volatile ecosystem of extreme, unending violence could easily consume itself in feral madness. To prevent this tragic collapse, this burning oceanic zeal must be directed, stoked, and rigorously policed by a darker breed of spiritual overseer. To understand the unending aggression of the crusading hosts, one must look to the burning heart that fuels their absolute wrath. In any other brotherhood of the Adeptus Astartes, the chaplains serve primarily as spiritual guides and watchers of morale. Among the Black Templars, they are the supreme spiritual and political enforcers. The Reclusium dictates the very pulse of the crusade, orchestrating the psychological fury of the fleet to ensure their zealotry never wanes for even a single bloody second. Clad in midnight ceramite and crowned with terrifying skull-faced helms, these warrior priests possess a dark, hypnotic charisma. They do not merely preach to their battle brothers. They dominate their minds, molding every single space marine into an uncompromising vessel of divine retribution. Picture the chaplain in the suffocating crucible of war. He is a terrifying apex of faith and violence, striding fearlessly through the slaughter while bellowing litanies of hate over the Vox network. With every sweeping strike of his crackling Crozius Arcanum, Xenos skulls are shattered into red mist and splintered bone. He does not fight in the traditional sense. He administers a brutal sacrament of blood. His amplified voice rises far above the deafening cacophony of bolter fire, reciting the liturgy of destruction with such overwhelming fanaticism that the warriors around him fall into a frenzied, zealous trance. They become completely numb to pain, deaf to fear, and driven solely by the hypnotic rhythm of his holy hatred. Trailing constantly in the bloody wake of these towering reclusiarchs and their subordinate chaplains is a retinue of macabre, shuffling attendants. These are the Cenobite servitors. They are gruesome, mind-wiped cyborgs, stripped of all human frailty and bound strictly to the eternal worship of the Imperial creed. Shackled by heavy chains and iron collars, they follow the chaplains directly into the thickest, most perilous fighting without a single trace of self-preservation. These tragic grotesques are burdened with the holiest relics of the chapter. They carry heavy brass incense braziers that choke the battlefield with the cloying, sacred scent of sanctified oils. Upon their hunched, mechanical frames, they bear the blasted bones of ancient martyrs, shards of shattered swords, and the tattered purity scrolls of fallen heroes. The sight of these venerable relics, marched directly through the mud and gore of alien worlds, drives the Black Templars to heights of unparalleled savagery. The mere presence of the Cenobite servitors transforms every battle line into a moving, breathing cathedral of slaughter. The chaplains are the undeniable masters of this crusading faith. They oversee every prayer, every strict fast, and every merciless execution. They bind the entire chapter together with iron rhetoric and righteous terror, ensuring that the holy fire of the Emperor never gutters out in the cold dark of the void. Yet, for all the horrific carnage they personally reap with their own weapons, their greatest, most sacred duty lies in identifying a singular avatar of divine wrath. Deep within the incense-choked meditation vaults of the great battle barges, these uncompromising shepherds of slaughter watch diligently for a vision from the master of mankind, waiting to anoint the ultimate spiritual weapon. The omens coalesce not in the casting of runes or the reading of entrails, but in the tortured mind of a single battle brother. On the eve of unprecedented slaughter, a chosen initiate is violently seized by the divine will. He collapses to the cold stone of the meditation cells, his mind inundated with searing golden light. These are the holy visions of the God Emperor. A psychic intrusion so agonizing it shatters the bounds of mortal sanity. The brother sees the master of mankind seated upon the golden throne, not as a silent deity, but as a bleeding, roaring god of war demanding a singular sacrifice. Dragged before the shadowed altars of the Reclusiam, the initiate confesses his waking nightmare to the skull-faced chaplains. They do not offer comfort, for this is no glorious blessing, it is a fatal possession. To prove the absolute purity of his visions, the brother is subjected to horrifying trials of faith. His unyielding flesh is branded with white-hot irons. His soul is scoured by the relentless incantations of the cult. Only when his blood runs black with soot and his agonized screams form the perfect catechisms of hatred is he deemed worthy of his preordained doom. The formal arming ritual that follows is not a celebration, but a funeral rite. The initiate is systematically stripped of his heraldry, his name, and his personal history. All his past deeds and future ambitions are violently erased from the chapter rolls. In their place, he is entombed within the armor of faith, an ancient relic shell deeply inscribed with litanies of absolute ruin. Into his gauntlets is thrust the black sword, a magnificent weapon of such immense physical weight and spiritual burden that only the truly doomed can wield it. He is no longer a space marine of the Adeptus Astartes. He is the Emperor's champion, an empty vessel of divine wrath animated solely by the borrowed fury of terror. Upon the battlefield, this living weapon exists entirely outside the traditional hierarchy of command. The champion does not lead his brothers, nor does he follow the orders of his marshal. He drifts through the storm of carnage as a solitary spectre of death, guarded fiercely by his brethren who recognize the terrifying holy madness burning in his eyes. His sole purpose is to seek out the supreme commanders and monstrous warlords of the enemy host. He challenges these towering horrors to apocalyptic, suicidal duels, willingly trading his own inevitable death for the total decapitation of the opposing army. This is a glorious martyrdom etched in stone long before the first drop of blood is ever spilled. He knows he will die, but he will drag the greatest enemies of humanity into the screaming abyss alongside him. This singular focus of absolute self-destructive violence stems from an uncompromising and utterly ruthless worldview. To truly comprehend the unfathomable depths of this holy fanaticism, one must first understand the three great hatreds that govern the very soul of the chapter. The foremost of these ancient abhorrences is the cardinal sin of twisted flesh, the vile and creeping rot of mutation that dares to mock the sacred human form. To understand the soul of a Black Templar, one must witness the outward manifestation of their faith. Their rigid internal spiritual architecture dictates an external reality of total annihilation. Foremost among their driving tenets is a vow of absolute and uncompromising hatred toward the mutant. They swear a sacred oath to suffer not the unclean to live. To the brethren of this chapter, the baseline human form is not merely a biological state, but a holy vessel meticulously sculpted by the God Emperor himself. It is the singular divine standard of perfection in a corrupted galaxy. Any deviation from this sacred template is viewed as a grotesque and unforgivable blasphemy. Whether a population has been twisted by the malignant touch of the immaterium, degraded by millennia of isolated genetic drift, or simply deformed by the hard radiation of a dying sun, the judgment of the crusade remains identical. There is no room for pity or negotiation. There is no consideration for mitigating circumstance. To exist in a mutated state is to offer a deliberate, personal insult to the master of mankind. The wider imperium of man is a sprawling, pragmatic regime that often makes grotesque compromises to ensure its survival. Administratum logic dictates that certain stable mutant strains, such as the hulking ogrins or the diminutive ratlings, are classified as sanctioned abhumans. They are integrated into the sprawling ranks of the Astra Militarum, tolerated as blunt but useful tools of war. The Black Templars harbor no such bureaucratic tolerance. They view these officially sanctioned deviations with utter, overwhelming revulsion. To a space marine of this chapter, fighting alongside an abhuman is to stand shoulder to shoulder with a walking affront to creation. While the decrees of the High Lords of Terror technically protect these mutant auxiliaries, a Templar crusade fleet will eagerly seize upon any pretext to enact a violent purge. A perceived slight, a minor hesitation in battle, or the most baseless accusation of chaotic taint is all the justification a marshal requires to order mass executions. The Templars will slaughter their own allied auxiliaries without a sliver of hesitation, meticulously cleansing the Imperial battle lines of what they deem genetic filth. This zealous dogma of bodily purity is not carried out with mere battlefield ferocity, but with cold, horrific, industrial efficiency. When a Black Templar crusade brings a mutant-harboring world to heel, the subsequent planetary cleansing is a living nightmare of systemic eugenics. Castellans and chaplains march through the ruins of conquered hab blocks, mercilessly scanning the surviving populations for the absolute slightest anatomical divergence. Those found wanting are not granted a swift death. They are gathered by the millions, herded like infected livestock, and subjected to the holy promethium of the purifying flame. Massive continental pyres light up the night skies of conquered worlds. The greasy ash of the unclean chokes the atmosphere as the chapter ensures that no degraded genetic material will ever again propagate. It is a mechanized, planetary-scale slaughter born of absolute religious conviction. Yet, as fiercely as the Black Templars hate the physical deformities of the mutant, they know that flesh is merely the fragile outer shell of humanity. A far more insidious corruption threatens the galaxy, one that does not twist the limbs, but tears at the very fabric of reality itself. The physical mutation of the body is but a pale shadow compared to the boundless, apocalyptic horror of the spiritual mutation. To hate the twisted flesh of the mutant is a holy duty, but to witness the corruption of the soul is to look upon the abyss itself. For the Black Templars, the mutant is a wretched offense to the physical form of humanity, but the witch is a terminal cancer upon reality. They hold no quarter for the psyker, no matter their allegiance. Unique among the myriad Space Marine chapters, the Sons of Sigismund absolutely refuse to field librarians. To them, the Immaterium is a realm of absolute and unredeemable corruption. To harness the energies of the warp in order to combat the forces of chaos is sheer, unadulterated madness. It is entirely akin to drinking deep from a chalice of vile poison simply to quench a dying thirst. Where other chapters march to war accompanied by the crackling lightning and unnatural storms of their battle mystics, the Black Templars bring only a terrifying, psychic silence. To the warp-sensitive, the approach of a Templar crusade is a suffocating, unnatural void. The turbulent tides of the Empyrean are violently pushed back, replaced entirely by the crushing, undeniable weight of sheer, fanatical faith. It is a dead zone that breeds dread, a suffocating aura of paranoid purity that chokes the breath from those attuned to the witch sight. Yet, even the most uncompromising zealot must face the bitter paradox of the wider Imperium. To cross the vast gulf of the galaxy, one must navigate the Sea of Souls. To communicate across the scattered stars, one must hurl messages through the shrieking tides of the warp. The chapter navigates a treacherous theological tightrope, bound by the deeply hypocritical necessity of utilizing the very sorcerers they so vehemently despise. Navigators and astropaths are permitted aboard their Grand Crusade fleets, but they are never truly accepted. They are treated as necessary evils, wretched tools to be wielded with profound disgust. These tragic souls are locked away in heavily shielded, miserable containment cells buried deep within the dark bowels of the strike cruisers. They live their agonizingly short lives in absolute isolation, forever sealed behind hexagrammic wards and cold iron. They are utterly segregated from the holy warriors who pace the pristine decks above. The Templars view these psychic servants with a paranoid, superstitious revulsion, guarding their prisons with bolters raised and prayers chanted in unending loops. Every astropathic whisper and every navigational adjustment is treated as a potential vector for demonic corruption. Thus, the Crusade fleet is purged of the witch and the mutant by the righteous fire of a hypocritical but unbreakable brotherhood. But the abominations born of human blood are not the only horrors polluting the Emperor's divine galaxy. Beyond the tainted flesh and the corrupted soul lies a threat entirely devoid of humanity. The Crusade cannot rest so long as the cold void remains infested, and the Templars must turn their burning gaze outward to fulfill a third and infinitely more violent vow. The Holy Trinity of abhorrence culminates in the most pervasive threat to the survival of mankind: the Xenos. Other chapters of the Adeptus Astartes might stoop to the pragmatism of temporary truces. They might calculate the tactical advantage of a brief parley with the deceitful Aeldari, or maneuver cautiously around the awakening tombs of the cold Necron dynasties. The Black Templars do no such thing. To these zealots, the mere existence of a non-human intelligence is a profane crime punishable by total planetary annihilation. They do not strategize around the alien. They eradicate it. Their response to Xenos contact is absolute, immediate, and unthinking genocide. The Crusade fleets carve a bloody swathe through alien empires, leaving only dead worlds and burning atmospheres in their wake. Every Xenos structure is toppled, and every alien spawn is put to the sword with the exact same merciless prejudice applied to their warriors. Nowhere is this unyielding extermination more violent than in their eternal war against the Orc race. The history between the Sons of Dawn and the Green-Skin Menace is a chronicle written in oceans of blood. During the apocalyptic nightmare known as the War of the Beast, it was the Imperial Fists and their successors who faced the ultimate tide of alien savagery. The Black Templars carry the bitter, agonizing legacy of that ancient slaughter deep within their gene seed. When a sword brethren looks upon a greenskin, he sees the existential doom of humanity made manifest. This ancestral blood feud demands a terrifyingly violent doctrine of war. The Black Templars favor close-quarters combat above all other forms of engagement, a tactic perfectly suited to fighting the Orc, yet tragically tested by the sheer brutality of the greenskin physique. They hurl themselves headlong into the roaring masses of alien infantry. Chainswords rev to a deafening scream as they bite through dense muscle and thick bone. It is a brutal, kinetic clash of ideologies, answering the green-skin desire for chaotic melee with cold, righteous fury. The battlefields become grinding meat presses where armor shatters and blood falls like heavy rain. The Space Marines wade through the tide of bodies, hacking and butchering without pause, fully aware that the unnatural vitality of the Orc requires total dismemberment to guarantee death. It is a slaughter without mercy, a frenzied culling where every crushed alien skull is a prayer offered to the master of mankind. Yet the green tide is endless, spreading like a fungal rot across the galactic spiral. As millennia bled into one another, the Orcs multiplied, returning in numbers unseen since the darkest days of the early Imperium. A beast of unimaginable power rose from the chaotic throngs, uniting the warring clans under a single bloody banner to challenge the Emperor's realm once more. The Black Templars would answer this rising storm with unmatched fanaticism. Their boundless hatred would soon draw them into the grinding jaws of the most devastating theater of war the modern galaxy had ever seen. They set their navigation augurs for a cursed hive world, racing toward a confrontation destined to become synonymous with eternal carnage. Such boundless hatred for the alien finds its ultimate modern crucible upon the ash wastes of Armageddon. The Third War for Armageddon saw billions of orcs descending upon the vital hive world, blotting out the sun with endless fleets of rust and iron. Beneath skies choked with industrial soot and the burning remains of orbital defense platforms, the sprawling metropolis of Hive Hell's Reach braced for the inevitable slaughter. The defense of this vital port city fell to a desperate coalition of the Imperial Guard, local militia, and the Black Templars. At their head stood Reclusiarch Grimaldus. When the High Marshal ordered Grimaldus to hold Hell's Reach, the Reclusiarch felt only the bitter sting of exile. He believed he had been relegated to a fool's errand, sentenced to die in the toxic mud alongside weak mortals, while his brothers claimed true glory in the void above. His heart burned with righteous fury, yet his oaths bound him to the dying city. He looked upon the trembling human defenders with pity and disdain, expecting them to break before the green tide. But as the millions of orcs crashed against the towering walls of Hell's Reach, the Reclusiarch discovered the profound truth of his vows. The siege was a meat grinder of unprecedented scale, an endless cycle of slaughter where streets ran thick with Xeno's blood and human ash. Through months of grueling, unrelenting warfare, Grimaldus witnessed the fragile mortals of the Steel Legion hold the line with unbroken courage. His disdain hardened into an unshakable bond of shared defiance. He became the roaring heart of the defense, an armored titan bellowing litanies of hatred that kept men standing long after their bodies should have failed. The climax of this catastrophic siege unfolded at the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant. As the outer defenses finally crumbled, the surviving forces pulled back to this monumental bastion of faith. The orc horde threw themselves at the basilica in a frenzied wave, determined to tear down the symbol of human devotion. In the ensuing apocalyptic struggle, the immense structural pillars gave way, and the towering domed ceiling collapsed in a cataclysm of shattered stone and stained glass. Thousands died instantly under millions of tons of crushing debris. The enemy celebrated their victory amidst the choking dust. Then the rubble shifted. From the ruins of the shattered temple, Reclusiarch Grimaldus clawed his way back into the light of the dying sun. His black armor was cracked and weeping blood, yet he refused to yield. In his massive gauntlets, he dragged the sacred relics of the temple, preserving the soul of Hell's Reach from the Xenos filth. To the bleeding remnants of the Imperial Guard, the sight of the Space Marine rising from a mountain of stone was nothing short of divine intervention. He stood before them as a living saint, a testament to the indomitable will of the Emperor. Hell's Reach burned, its population decimated, yet humanity endured in the ashes because of this sheer, unrelenting zeal. Such miraculous survival, forged in the fires of complete fanaticism, cements the legend of the Black Templars across the stars. Yet, the very fire that allows a Space Marine to defy death itself burns entirely out of control. This uncompromising zealotry, blind to reason and nuance, breeds an absolute extremism that looks upon everything outside its narrow dogma with deep, violent suspicion. Yet the ashes of Armageddon hide a darker truth about the sons of Sigismund. To view the Black Templars as noble saviors is a fatal miscalculation. They are dangerous fanatics bound only to their own absolute dogma. To the wider Imperial war machine, they are a weapon lacking a hilt, bleeding the very hand that seeks to wield them. Imperial commanders watch their black-armored allies not with gratitude, but with creeping terror. The Templars answer to no mortal authority. They have been known to abandon critical strategic battlefronts without a word of warning, leaving planetary defense lines to collapse simply because a marshal experienced a vision or declared a sudden vendetta against a distant foe. Their righteous fury makes no distinction between the alien and the faltering servant of the throne. Entire regiments of the Astra Militarum have been slaughtered by the very space marines sent to reinforce them. A moment of battlefield cowardice, a whispered doubt, or the slightest perceived mutation within the ranks of conscripts is enough to trigger a massacre. To the Black Templar, a weak ally is merely a heretic waiting to be unmasked. Their absolute independence makes them a nightmare for the Lords of Terror to command. This unchecked zealotry has inevitably drawn the gaze of the Inquisition. The ordos of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition demand absolute subservience from all who defend humanity. The Black Templars offer none. Their relationship with the shadowy lords of the Imperium is strained to the point of outright hostility. Nowhere is this conspiratorial tension more evident than in the shadowed records of the Ophidian Gulf Crusade. In that cursed expanse, the Templars fought alongside the secretive Dark Angels and forces of the Inquisition. What began as a united front rapidly deteriorated into a labyrinth of suspicion and paranoia. When the Dark Angels abandoned the war zone to pursue their own hidden agendas, the Black Templars took it as a grave insult to their honor. The Inquisition attempted to intervene, seeking to suppress the spiraling conflict and mask the secrets of the First Legion. Instead of bowing to the inquisitorial rosette, the Black Templars drew their blades. They nearly plunged the Ophidian Gulf into an open, fratricidal war against both the Inquisition and their brother Astartes. They care nothing for political nuance or the delicate balance of imperial power. If the law of the Imperium contradicts the law of their faith, they will slaughter the lawmakers. They are a terrifying double-edged sword, striking down the enemies of humanity while leaving a trail of butchered allies and shattered command structures in their wake. The High Lords tolerate them only because their unyielding ferocity is a necessity in a hostile universe. But a blade forged only for killing cannot be sheathed, and their fanaticism has blinded them to the limits of their own strength. The Templars believe their faith is an impenetrable armor against any horror the cosmos can conjure. That absolute certainty is about to be shattered. A cataclysm approaches that will rip the galaxy asunder and test the limits of their zeal. Soon the light of the Emperor they worship so violently will be swallowed entirely by the encroaching dark. Then the fabric of reality shattered. The cicatrix maledictum tore across the heavens in a screaming wound of warp fire, splitting the galaxy in twain. The guiding beacon of the Astronomicon, the divine light of the Emperor, was violently extinguished in a single catastrophic instant. The Imperium was plunged into the absolute terror of the Noctis Aeterna. It was a darkness so profound it devoured the stars themselves and left humanity completely blind. Scattered across the vastness of a dying galaxy, the crusade fleets of the Black Templars found themselves abruptly severed from terror. They were stranded adrift in an ocean of encroaching madness. Navigators screamed and clawed out their own eyes as the warp rushed in. Astropaths burned away to ash where they sat. The void surrounding the grand battle barges ceased to be empty space and became a churning, shrieking sea of demonic flesh. Foul entities battered relentlessly against the straining Geller fields. The endless vaulted corridors of the crusade ships were plunged into an oppressive and freezing blackness. It was an apocalyptic dread that would have shattered the minds of lesser men, yet in the suffocating claustrophobia of the dead void, the Black Templars did not yield to despair. The Reclusium took absolute spiritual command. The chaplains, adorned in their macabre skull helms and draped in the heavy chains of their devotion, declared this suffocating blackness to be the ultimate crucible. They preached to their brothers that the emperor had deliberately stripped away his light to weigh the true and naked measure of their souls. This was the final test of their endless crusade. To waver was heresy. To fear was an invitation to damnation. In the absolute and crushing dark, the chapter found its greatest clarity. When the massive ship hulls inevitably breached and the nightmarish creatures of the warp spilled into the shadowed lower decks, the Templars fought utterly blind. Chainswords roared in the pitch-black corridors, illuminated only by the brief and violent sparks of clashing adamantium and tearing metal. They did not fight with tactical augers or visual targeting feeds. They fought with the sheer psychic weight of their unyielding zealotry. Endless litanies of pure hate were chanted with such thunderous and unified volume that the acoustic force alone seemed to repel the demonic incursions. Space Marines locked their heavy boots to the bloody floor plates and stood shoulder to shoulder in the lightless choke points. They turned their very bodies into an impenetrable bulwark of righteous fury. Their fanatical faith became a tangible and physical force in the material universe, a burning aura of sheer hatred that poisoned the air against the creatures of the Empyrean. The absolute horrors of the warp crashed against the armored zeal of the Sons of Dawn and were broken in the dark. In the bleakest night of the Imperium, where hope was starved and reason died, the fanatical hatred of the Black Templars thrived and multiplied. They survived isolated in the void purely on battle prayers and the intoxicating purity of their own rage. They held the line in the total darkness, surviving minute by minute, waiting for a dawn they believed they had to earn with endless slaughter. Yet, when that dawn finally came, the celestial light that pierced the gloom brought with it a revelation that would shake the very foundations of their rigid dogma. The shadow of the Great Rift had barely begun to settle when a new dawn broke across the battered fleets of the Black Templars. It was a dawn heralded by the torchbearer fleets, bearing miracles that tested the very limits of the chapter's dogmatic soul. Word spread like wildfire through the void that Primarch Guilliman, the avenging sun, had risen from his millennia of slumber. To the Black Templars, the return of a living Primarch was nothing less than the manifestation of the God Emperor's direct will. Yet the gifts Guilliman brought upon his indomitous crusade threatened to tear the zealous brotherhood apart from within. Alongside the Lord Commander came the Primaris Space Marines, a newly engineered breed of transhuman warrior forged in the secret vaults of Mars. This revelation birthed a theological crisis of unprecedented proportions. The firstborn veterans of the Black Templars viewed the original genetic template of the Adeptus Astartes as the holy and untouchable architecture of the Master of Mankind himself. To alter this divine biology, even to improve upon its design, flirted dangerously with the absolute darkest of tech heresies. Could a creation born of Archmagus Call's cold science truly possess the righteous fury required to carry out the eternal crusade? The chaplains and marshals debated with unsheathed blades. The Templars stood upon a perilous precipice, caught between their sworn obedience to a living demigod and the strict adherence to their 10,000-year-old fanaticism. High Marshal Helbrecht met this terrifying dilemma with an uncharacteristic and heavy stillness. As the chapter teetered on the brink of an internal schism, the Supreme Commander withdrew deeply into the shadowed vaults of the Eternal Crusaders' Grand Reclusium. For several days and nights he fasted and knelt before the revered relics of Sigismund, seeking a profound communion with the Emperor. He wrestled bitterly with the crushing weight of sacred dogma clashing violently against divine authority. If Guilliman was truly the Emperor's voice made flesh, to reject his torchbearers would be a treasonous act of supreme heresy. When Helbrecht finally emerged from the incense-choked darkness, his decree was absolute and unyielding. The Primaris Brethren would be accepted into the chapter's ranks, but they would be granted no unearned reverence. Their integration into the Crusades was a brutal and bloody ordeal. These new warriors possessed superior physical strength and anatomical resilience, yet they lacked the scarred, fanatic soul of a true Templar. To be fully embraced by their suspicious brethren, the Primaries had to violently prove their zeal. They were thrown relentlessly into the vanguard of the most desperate and punishing war zones. They bled and died in the mud alongside the firstborn, their pristine armor quickly bathed in the vile gore of the alien and the heretic. Through shared slaughter and an unbreakable fury, they slowly earned their white tabards. To properly harness this new breed of killer, the chapter adapted its ancient martial structures, birthing the unique Castellan squad variants. These specialized formations married the sheer physical supremacy of the Primaris with the uncompromising tactical dogma of the Templars. Led by veterans of 100 campaigns, these variants ensured that the raw power of the new recruits was saturated with holy, uncontrolled wrath. The new Sons of Dawn were thus baptized in the crucible of unending war, bound tightly together by the unwavering decree of the warlord who must now guide them all into the dying of the light. The chapter now stands unbroken, swollen with the transhuman might of the Primaries and bound entirely to the will of a single absolute sovereign. High Marshal Helbrecht is the undisputed master of the Black Templars and the living avatar of the end times. Clad in master-crafted armor of burnished auramite, he is a blinding golden titan striding through an endless sea of black-armored crusaders. He is the supreme warlord of the Emperor's most zealous sons. Helbrecht is a man possessed by such singular, unyielding fury that his mere presence can turn a shattered battle line into a tide of unstoppable butchery. He stands as the very embodiment of Sigismund's ancient, unforgiving oath. He is a commander who would eagerly watch the entire galaxy burn to ash before he would ever permit a single step backward in the face of the alien or the heretic. Yet beneath the holy oils and the golden warplate, the High Marshal is a soul consumed by an agonizing alchemy of shame, rage, and divine purpose. This ceaseless apocalyptic wrath was forged in the fires of a bitter legendary feud with a metallic nightmare from the ancient past. Imhotep, the Stormlord, supreme overlord of the soulless Necron empires, dared to strike down the master of the Black Templars. In a duel that shook the blood-soaked surface of a frozen world, the undying Machine King did not grant Helbrecht the martyr's death he so desperately craved. Instead, Imhotep chose to humiliate his conquered foe. The Stormlord severed the High Marshal's right hand, leaving him alive in the freezing mud to bear the agonizing weight of ultimate defeat. For any other lord of the Adeptus Astartes, a master-crafted bionic replacement would have quickly erased the physical ruin of such a wound. Helbrecht fiercely refused such sterile comfort. He chose instead to make a grisly monument of his maiming, ensuring the raw memory of his failure would burn eternal in his transhuman mind. He commanded his tech priests to integrate his severed stump directly into the gilded hilt of the sword of the High Marshals. This weapon is no mere power blade, but a sacred, devastating relic forged directly from the shattered, razor-toothed remains of Rogel Dawn's own colossal chainsword. With his very flesh Permanently bonded to the physical legacy of his Primarch, Helbrecht wields his own mutilated body as an instrument of mass annihilation. Driven by this consuming fire, he directs the endless crusader fleets across the bleeding heavens of the Imperium Nihilus with renewed terrifying vigor. He demands nothing less than absolute perfection from his vast armadas, casting the shadow of his boundless zeal across every vessel that bears the Cross of Dawn. To serve beneath this golden behemoth is to surrender all notions of self, safety, or rest. The warriors who fight at his command do not live as mere soldiers of the Emperor. They exist as fanatical ascetics chained permanently to a holy grindstone of ceaseless war. Beneath the deafening roar of the void engines, the true toll of Helbrecht's crusade is measured in the grueling, blood-stained devotions demanded of every battle brother locked within the deep iron bellies of the fleet. Far beneath the grand stratagems of the High Marshal lies the grim reality of the individual Astartes. To understand the Black Templars, one must descend into the shadowed bowels of their strike cruisers, where the clamor of war yields to the heavy silence of the cloister. Here, in dimly lit armories, suffocated by the choking musk of sacred incense, the true nature of the chapter is laid bare. A thousand-voice choir of serfs and servitors drones an endless, atonal dirge that vibrates through the iron decking. Within these iron cells, the Space Marine is stripped of his majesty and reduced to a penitent monk. There is no joy in their existence, no brotherhood forged in boisterous camaraderie. There is only the cold, mechanical preparation for death and the agonizing pursuit of spiritual purity. Observe the ritual of the chain, a sacred rite performed in the gloom before every deployment. Thick iron links are bound tightly around the gauntlet and fused directly to the casing of the bolter or the hilt of the chainsword. This is no mere pragmatic measure to secure a blade. It is a holy vow etched in blood and iron, a covenant that the weapon shall never leave the warrior's grasp so long as life remains. The origins of this practice are shrouded in the bloody mists of the Great Crusade, born long before the arch-traitor Horus plunged the galaxy into darkness. It was the first captain, Sigismund himself, who adopted the martial tradition of weapon chains from the gladiatorial fighting pits of the World Eaters. He witnessed the raw, unapologetic brutality of those savage warriors and distilled it into a doctrine of unyielding righteous fury. What was once a barbaric custom of pit fighters was consecrated by the Templars into a supreme act of devotion. To drop a weapon is to accept defeat, and for a son of dawn, defeat is a sin that can only be washed away by death. Between the bloody butcheries of the battlefield, the Black Templar subjects himself to torments that would break a mortal mind. They are hollow vessels, emptied of humanity and filled only with the Emperor's wrath. In the deep darkness of their meditation cells, the rhythmic crack of the electro-whip echoes against the bulkheads. They engage in brutal self-flagellation, scouring the perceived weaknesses of the flesh with barbed lashes and searing brands. They undertake punishing fasts, denying their transhuman physiology the sustenance it craves until the edges of their vision blur with holy delirium. Their purity rites are agonizing ordeals of pain and endurance, designed to burn away any lingering trace of mortal frailty. Every scar carved by their own hand is a prayer. Every drop of blood spilled in the cloister is an offering to the Golden Throne. They are absolute fanatics who have weaponized their own suffering. To look upon a Black Templar in his private devotions is to look upon a nightmare of asceticism, a creature that has excised every ounce of compassion and joy from its soul. They live only to inflict the pain they so willingly embrace upon the enemies of mankind, marching endlessly forward toward a doom they crave. To look upon the ranks of the Black Templars is to gaze upon a monument to grief 10 millennia in the making. They are not merely an instrument of war forged in the aftermath of betrayal. They are the manifest agony of a broken heart. When the Emperor fell and the golden dream of unity shattered upon the blood-stained marble of terror, reason died with it. In the ashes of secular truth, only sorrow remained. The sons of dawn took that crushing despair and hammered it upon the anvil of their souls. They weaponized their boundless tragedy into a genocidal faith that knows no borders and accepts no surrender. The galaxy is burning around us. The Imperium of man is failing, bleeding out from 1,000,000 unhealable wounds across the stars. Rational minds look to the encroaching darkness, witness the death of hope, and surrender to despair. But the Black Templars do not care. Where others see the suffocating twilight of humanity, they see only fuel for their holy pyre. They do not seek to save the galaxy from the flames, they are the fire. To understand their unending, apocalyptic rage, one must remember the final hours of their founding father. Consider Sigismund, the first High Marshal, standing a solitary vigil at the edge of the Eye of Terror, while the rest of the Imperium sought to forget the traitor legions. He waited for the nightmare to return, unyielding in his terrible conviction. When Abaddon the Despoiler finally broke the threshold of real space, Sigismund was ancient. The centuries had slowed his peerless blade, and mortal fragility had claimed the blinding speed of his youth. The Despoiler cut him down, violently ending the life of the greatest swordsman the Space Marines had ever known. Yet, in his final agonizing moments, Sigismund offered no grand philosophical revelation. He offered no plea for mercy and no absolution to his slayer. With his dying breath, the first High Marshal simply spat blood at the arch-traitor. He promised Abaddon that he would die just as his weakling father died, soulless, honorless, weeping, and ashamed. That singular moment of pure, concentrated hatred became the spiritual template for every battle brother who would ever wear the Black Cross. That dying curse did not fade with the passing of the millennia. It echoes across 10,000 years of endless slaughter. It is roared from the vox grills of ancient dreadnoughts and chanted by thousands of zealous throats across a multitude of hellish war zones. Every brutal stroke of a roaring chainsword is a continuation of that unyielding defiance. Every burning heretic is a testament to their absolute refusal to forgive the sins of the past. The crusade is eternal because their hatred is infinite. Listen now to the howling void, and you will hear the litanies of the righteous rising above the cosmic slaughter. Accept any challenge, no matter the odds. Suffer not the unclean to live. Uphold the honor of the Emperor. Destroy the witch. Purge the mutant. Kill the heretic. The prayers merge into a singular deafening roar of absolute annihilation. They are the Emperor's vengeance made manifest in ceramite and blood. They march into the abyssal dark, unbroken and unbowed, screaming the sacred words that spell the doom of traitors and alien gods alike. No pity, no remorse, no fear,